You don't want somebody to walk up and go, "Where's the cow house?"
Where's the milk or the semen from?
Wait, they come out of different holes? So, on today's episode of Careers Over Beers, I have with me Jesse McCurry.
Another Jesse.
Another Jesse. Cheers to that, brother.
Cheers to that.
It's nice seeing another Jesse. I don't get to see Jessies very often.
And if you do, they're girls and they're spelled different.
Right, with the
it's
I.
It's nice to see another Jesse.
And we're both rocking K-State gear today.
That's right.
That was kind of a coincidence.
They're doing so well.
They're doing not well in basketball anyways. So, are you a glass guy or a bottle guy?
I'm going to stick to bottles, I think.
Stick to bottles? Yeah, I'll stick to bottles too. We're drinking Bud Light today, the American Classic. Is that your favorite beer?
Growing up, everybody drank Coors Light at home, and then they switched to Keystone at a certain point, probably because of price. And then I never really drank Bud Light until college, and then that kind of became the thing. You know, occasionally I'll have a craft beer, but
Bud Light's the go-to, it seems like, in the Midwest at least.
Doesn't hurt.
You know? It really doesn't. I like it.
What's your favorite?
I don't really have a favorite, but, you know, if I'm just grabbing something to drink like 12 in a row, if I'm watching a game, it'll usually be Bud Light or something. But I enjoy a good craft every now and then, too. I'll drink anything, really. Yeah. As long as it gets my mind right.
It sounds like a typical Colwitchian.
Yep. So, tell us what you do for a living.
I work for farmers. And usually when I say that on an airplane, they think I'm part of the insurance company, and then I get to explain that I actually work for real farmers. So it's an interesting position. Commodity group, you know, it's kind of a general. It's somewhere in between the pure private sector and the government, and I get the chance to try to make a difference for farmers in a number of areas. So
you're basically fighting for farmers then, or?
Yes, I always was interested in agriculture and politics and communication, and so there was a chance to help farmers. And, you know, farmers aren't always the best advocates themselves. You know, they're too busy working for a living. So there's a sweet spot of people that they'll hire to help on public policy, on marketing, on exports, on making their case in terms of what are they doing for a living and why does it matter, kind of a thing.
Okay.
So it's been fun. It's weird because I work from home and not too far from here, and there's not very many of us that can do that, but I've been blessed to have the opportunity to work for farmers.
That's really cool. So you're basically the voice for farmers, is what you're saying.
I'm a voice for farmers.
You're a voice for farmers.
Farmers have their own voice themselves, but there are advocacy groups in terms of careers that, whether it's Farm Bureau or the Kansas Livestock Association, and in my niche, I'm a commodity group leader, quote unquote. So there's all these crops: soybeans, corn, wheat, sorghum, that are specific enough to where they have their own need for better policies, better markets, their own particular niche. That's how I fit into them.
So is this like a newer type of job or position? Has this always been around and I just never knew about it? Or is this more of something that's starting to catch on where you have these advocacy groups like you?
Actually, almost every niche that you can think of has an advocacy person.
Oh, really?
Blueberries, popcorn, beer, lottery tickets, you know, name the gamut of any special interest group. And I think I'll always say that we're a little bit different than your garden variety special interest group. But yes, in the process of the government and in the areas of exports and need for representation, if you pick your favorite niche, somebody's representing those people.
How did you end up there? How did you even find out about a position like that?
That's a long story. Sorghum, we know it as Milo.
Yeah, can you explain what sorghum is to everybody?
So sorghum is Milo.
It is Milo.
It is Milo.
It's just a variant of it?
No, it's actually, for our purposes, it is Milo.
Okay.
But when you get into the academic space and the trade space, they tend to specialize, and they say sorghum more than Milo. Milo, I'm not an agronomist or a seed dealer. I can't tell you exactly what the variants are, but for the public, when we were young, or your parents or grandparents were young, driving around seeing a waist-high red-headed crop, that's sorghum, that's Milo. So it's a corn, it's basically a grass corn type plant that uses a little bit less or a little bit less water, and is pretty specialized to Kansas and Texas. You'll have on the western plains, the panhandle of Oklahoma, the panhandle of Texas, West Kansas, that's where you'll see it, especially in the fall. You know, as people get excited about putting out their decorations for Halloween or for Thanksgiving, that's when you'll see that little red-headed stepchild crop that I represent.
Very cool. Do they make sorghum beer?
They do. The most popular liquor is called Baijiu or Baijiu.
Shit, that's what we should have been drinking today.
I'm not sure that you would probably try it.
I would.
You would.
You wouldn't, though?
I have, and I can. In China, such a huge population of people, very historic and very traditional, and it's kind of like in Japan, where you have, what's their version of a clear
sake?
Sake.
Yeah, or sake.
It's kind of like that, but in China, it's a ceremonial drink. You know, if you're gonna,
the sorghum liquor is.
The sorghum liquor is. If you're gonna, in China, if you're gonna have a wedding or you're gonna graduate or you're gonna have something to celebrate, they're gonna drink this clear liquor that's based from sorghum. Now, the challenge and the opportunity for the U.S. is that population is growing so much that they need to have U.S. based feedstock to help fill that bucket. And I've been in parts of China that are much bigger than any city you've seen in the U.S. I mean, I've been to New York, I've been to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. They've built cities that size in the last 5 years. And so they have this challenge of traditional production of liquor in baskets that are buried in the ground. And they also have professional companies, and they also have very professional companies like Koch Industries that they've just built out in the middle of nowhere to build nothing but Baijiu. So the demand is tremendous, and as long as they want to drink it.
So is that a crop that's native to China?
It is. It's native actually to most of the rest of the world, particularly African nations. Australia produces it, Argentina produces it.
And now it's really big in the Midwest.
It's been big in the Midwest for most of our lifetime, or our whole lifetime.
Yeah.
But because of growth in other countries, and the U.S. can grow ag products like nobody else, in volume. And if you want to tell us, you know, I want to have a flavor or a niche, and it may be better in western Kansas or parts of Texas, and we're going to contract with you as farmers to do a premium there, we're going to do it for them.
Okay. So what are some common things or popular foods and other drinks besides the liquor-based ones that people eat every day that are from sorghum?
That's a great question, and the easiest answer is a quinoa replacement. You know, there are populations, particularly in the West and the East Coast, that want to have gluten-free, non-GMO.
Right.
And I don't want to be disparaging because, again, most of our farmers, almost all of our farmers, grow all these crops. But there is a demand for gluten-free, non-GMO, using less water, fewer inputs, etc. And so the short answer is salad toppings, protein bars, pet food. You know, there's a lot of interest in pets around the world. Present company excluded. We all need to lose weight, and sorghum has a very low. I know, sorghum has a very low digestibility, so they can replace other products with sorghum. Ethanol plants. You know, we're sitting here in Colwich. Currently, they're not using sorghum because it's pricey because of Chinese demand. But
for ethanol, like fuel you put in your car?
Correct.
Really?
Yes, sorghum Milo.
Okay, because I always thought of corn whenever I was looking at you see the pumps that have E85 on them? That's always was corn under. That was what my impression of it was.
It is in large part, but there's times of the year, especially when there's not export demand for Milo, that these ethanol plants will use sorghum indistinguishably from corn.
Oh, okay.
It's a starch source. So, you know, once they get used to using sorghum, you know, and how it runs through the plant and the enzymes and the rest of it, it's a feedstock that's just attractive based on price. And increasingly what we're trying to do is make it more valuable. Mm-hmm. So how can we get higher protein, waxy, differentiated niches for bird seed? There's lots of contract opportunities for farmers where they, especially in western parts of what we call the sorghum belt, which is that Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, South Dakota, Nebraska, western part.
So here in the middle of Kansas, we're in the sorghum belt?
We're on the edge of it.
We're on the edge of it?
I mean, if you were to look at a map, the corn belt traditionally is I know this is just thrilling your listeners to hear about the types of crop belts around the world, but
hey, the ag listeners out there, and they're all out there, man.
It's an arid function. It's a function of rainfall, and so the challenge sorghum has had is, can I grow corn? Maybe, maybe not. Can I grow sorghum? Perhaps, and potentially even better with the price that's out there for Milo.
So what would you say a normal day in your life looks like on the job? Because I kind of know what you do now and where you're at with it, but what do you actually do?
Like most jobs, or maybe many jobs, even before COVID, we work from home. I travel.
Was that before COVID too, or is that just a product of COVID?
It started before COVID.
Okay.
My position, even when I was on the national staff, was remote. It was home-based with good laptops and technology.
All provided?
All provided, a willingness to travel, and some expertise or actually probably most of it has been the right geographical location, a trust factor on pushing priorities that are from my organization. Mm-hmm. They don't really care where you're at. Can you get to an airport? Can you drive from your location in our region? And I haven't worked in an office setting, traditional office setting, for 7 years.
Are you a fan of that? I know some people like going into work every day. A lot of people, especially the younger people, like working from home.
We're seeing an interesting, this is just my own experience. I like it. I miss parts about it. I worked in Wichita for Kennedy & Co., which is now Keiko Isom, an accounting firm on the east side of town. I worked at the state of Kansas in Topeka and commuted and, you know, worked in an office setting. There's trade backs. But at the end of the day, I would say if somebody's willing to do the work and can be trusted and can deliver results, in my experience right now, nobody cares where you're at.
That's the way of the world, it looks like. That's the way it's all moving. I mean, a lot of traditional industries that were all, you know, you come to work, you do the commute, you sit in the office for 8 hours. A lot of that's going away, especially with COVID now, but I think that just probably sped it up. It was probably coming eventually anyways, just because of the way of the world. I mean, you can do a podcast or you can be in a business meeting halfway across the world. So but being in Kansas, you're in a good spot being in ag, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of comes back to 2 or 3 things you said, which is expertise or connections, a geographical spot. What's really been attractive is the Wichita Airport. When I was young, we had to drive to Kansas City or Oklahoma City to fly anywhere. That's not the case anymore.
Even though we're the air capital of the world.
You typically, for a good chunk of my life, you went to Kansas City or Oklahoma City to fly anywhere.
Well, we're the air capital, but we're the air capital manufacturing probably of the world, right?
That's true, and we're also the ag capital in many respects. And so this ability you have to have either technical expertise or relationships or proximity, but if you're willing to travel and you've got a trust factor of delivering some results from where you're from, especially, I don't think it's just agriculture. There's a lot of openings right now that I've seen. Now, you may have to consider living in Dodge City or the eastern part of Colorado, but they can pay and they need good people. And so
if you don't mind living in the rural Midwest.
Exactly.
People hear Colorado, though. That's what's funny. And they're like, oh, Colorado.
Close.
And then you go to eastern Colorado and you're like, this is flatter than Kansas. Right?
No, it's interesting. But this happened before COVID. COVID has accelerated it. And now you've seen how companies and nonprofits and others are saying, we're going to shut down this office space because we know who our people are and where they are and what they can do.
Right. So, as a organization like yours, how big is your company?
2 staff and an intern and a board of 18 people.
So, where does your guys' income come from? Is it coming from the farmers that are paying you guys, or yeah?
A couple places. The first one is a checkoff program. So, it's a little bit unfamiliar to people that aren't used to it, but in certain sectors of the economy, there's what we call a checkoff. Because in a commodity, it's hard to get individual subscriptions or individual value captured. So because of the nature of agriculture, there's a willingness to create a checkoff program, which is a portion of the sale of receipts. So in our case, every sorghum farmer that sells sorghum, Milo, in this area or any area is going to pay a portion of that revenue to my organization. That's overseen by the United States Department of Ag. It's not different than the oil industry or other commodities that are trying to have it's basically a self-help organization. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to have individual action to create a fund for their own preservation. And so in ag, you have cotton, you have sorghum, you have corn, you have soybeans, you have wheat, you have all these niches that are helping self-fund their own preservation for marketing. As an overall commodity, it's hard to imagine how you would have a purely private, self-initiated fund to help market that product. Uh-huh. And so this is why the Congress has created a number of checkoff orders that includes the Sorghum Commission. The other side of the equation is the lobbying side. Mm-hmm. So you can't use sorghum checkoff funding for lobbying activities, and you can understand why.
Right. That's same with other industries too.
It's
right?
not appropriate.
Yeah.
So then what you do is you ask individual farmers and entities that are connected to the interests of sorghum to fund lobbying activities, legislative activities outside of the checkoff. And so what I represent is that whole picture for the state of Kansas for sorghum.
Okay. So you're kind of the mediator between all of those.
Well, my kids call me Mr. Milo.
Mr. Milo. I like it.
Which
that's what you should have introduced yourself as here.
Is not the sexiest moniker in the world.
I think it's sexy.
You do?
I do.
Okay, Jesse. As you're wearing a black sheep hat.
I am wearing a black sheep hat with Mr. Milo.
But you don't think about these parts of the economy. We're not very sexy. I mean, let's be honest. The ag or the aviation economy is pretty sexy.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of the manufacturing economy maybe, but there's this very significant area in some studies, maybe the most significant part of the economy in this county, in this state, that are ag related.
Yeah, and I would argue with that where you said you're not very sexy, because I think that there's a lot of people, especially that grow up in the ag world in the Midwest, right? Around farmers their whole lives, live in the country or the rural areas. And they're trying to find paths so they can continue being an ag, but not necessarily be a farmer.
That's why I'm working where I am.
Right. That's a position like yours. There's things out there that you can do and still be involved, and you don't necessarily have to have all the acres and all of the land to be a farmer.
You, in fact, anymore, probably unfortunately, but fortunately for the people listening that want a job, you don't have to be a farmer to work in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
They want talent. They're no different than oil or aviation or the service economy or anything else. They need talented people, and you can take your passion from farming and ranching or your upbringing in 4-H or whatever, and that's just what I did. I didn't want to be a farmer.
You didn't?
There's people that know that they want to be a farmer, and God bless them, because we need farmers. But there's people that have interest in ag and farming that have other talents and skills,
right,
that prefer that industry than to be an ad salesman or to be anywhere else in the economy. And I've experimented with a lot of that, but thank goodness there's that. Especially now, commodity prices are up. We've had good export trade. Anybody that's interested in finding a living, even if at first they think, oh, it's ag, dispel yourself of that and find a good job.
Well, I think a lot of people just have a misconception of what ag all entails. Most people, especially if you're not from the Midwest, think agriculture and they think farmer, and that's all they think. I mean, they don't realize all the other stuff going on out there. So, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Would you say that to be a farmer, you have to almost grow up or inherit it? You can't really go out unless you inherit money, I guess, and buy a bunch of land to be a farmer, right?
It's difficult to do that today. If you have a relationship, there are farmers who are retiring, and there's farm ground that's selling. It's difficult on your own to have the capital and the relationships to do it purely yourself. Now, if you want to farm for a living and you're willing to find a break-in point and perhaps create a relationship with a family or an entity that can guide you there, that's a potential. You better have some strong opinions and some strong capabilities around agronomy, around the technology front. But the service industry and the input industry and the types of jobs that I'm doing, there's not very many of them. But if you have a passion for it, you can be around it, especially if you're in a STEM standpoint. If you have a high degree of capability in science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah.
If you want to be a breeder, a crop technician, if you want to service the crops from an endpoint standpoint, there's opportunities out there.
So what brought you to sorghum out of all the crops? I know you mentioned all sorts of other ones like wheat, corn. Why sorghum? Or Milo, I guess, for the sake of the podcast. But, why did you choose that one? Was there any specific reason?
People I know.
People you know?
So
it's not that you just had a passion for Milo.
Well, I have a passion for ag,
Yes.
and I never had anything against Milo. I wanted an opportunity to represent farmers' interests, and I had some skills and some relationships that could connect me to that conversation.
And you didn't want to be the farmer.
I'm more of a gardener.
More of a gardener?
You know, again, my dad has reminded me of this several times. Unless you're wanting and really willing to get up and pull a dead calf at 4 a.m. and do the work that's required in actual production agriculture, the only other option for people like me that have a passion for ag and a willingness and a want to serve ag is in opportunities like I have today.
Right.
And so I embrace that. It wasn't a plan per se, although I would say that when I was in college, I wanted to be an ag advocate. And so, unless I'm going to move to D.C. or Topeka, you have to keep your eyes peeled.
In a place where the politicians hang out?
Well, there are opportunities there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't discount that, especially if you're young. You're not going to make anything at the beginning.
You're just doing it out of a passion.
If you want to do that and live in those cities, you can. I've always been more connected to my family out here and a place to raise my kids and do what I'm doing here. It's a rare thing, but they're not unavailable.
Right. So, speaking of politicians and politics, what is something that politicians could do better to help you guys out? And what's something that you fight for? Or what's something you actually butt heads with politicians about? If you want to talk about that at all.
Oh, I can, sure.
Do they ever drive you crazy with things they do and policies they pass?
The biggest challenge we have is, more than anything, the actual demographic math. If I'm a politician today, if I decided at my stage of Jackson's age, my son, who's a 14-year-old, just got his learner's permit.
Get him a farmer's permit.
Let's just say I was Jackson and I said I wanted to be a politician. The problem is the demographics. There's not a huge chunk of availability to represent agriculture. They're very specialized, and in fairness to them, they're reflecting what they're hearing and seeing from their constituency, the money, the interests. If I was representing an area from downtown Kansas City, why would I care about Milo?
True. You wouldn't.
And so then it becomes a question of, is there a chance that I can help that individual understand about food aid around the world? There's hunger around the world. But let's be honest, we're all working with what we have who are pressuring us the most.
So you're basically the voice for these farmers. You're the voice yelling at these politicians. This is why it's important. This is why policies need to be this way or that way.
I'm a voice.
You're a voice, not the voice.
Primarily, I would say that I'm helping our farmers from Kansas be that voice. My direct boss is from Andale, Kansas, Kent Winter. Mm-hmm. He's a farmer. My other boss directly is a farmer from Stockton, Kansas, which is north central, northwest. But again, how many people are there? We have great influence with the individuals that we're directly talking to, including both of our national senators, including our Congress people, but we're a shrinking minority. So how do we make ag sexy, interesting, compared to the 25, 50, 100 other priorities that any professional politician would have to represent?
That's a good question. How do you?
Well, I think we do it by trying to expand the conversation about food, why food is available and why it matters. How can we have additional food options that are in a different category that's interesting?
Well, a lot of people today, and I want to know your opinion on this
Go
one,
ahead.
because a lot of people today are afraid of the big GMOs, right?
Sure.
Everywhere you go, it's GMO free this, whatever it is, you know. What's your opinion on GMOs? Is that hurting the farmers? I think I said farmers.
I think it
Farmers.
from a calorie standpoint,
Yeah.
no.
What do you mean by that?
There's no question. Bill Gates would tell you this.
Uh-oh.
When that doesn't help, maybe, but from an availability of calorie standpoint, no, GMOs don't hurt you. GMOs are safe. This comes down to more of a risk and benefit conversation. I was on a call a couple weeks ago where they were challenging me, and I never thought about this, but in the research with the general public, the public benefits and finds high value with prescription drugs, but they don't find any value or benefit from pesticides. They find high benefit from x-rays, but they don't find any benefit from nuclear power. So it becomes a risk-benefit conversation. It's scary.
Is it, I mean, the risks outweigh, the benefits outweigh the risks. If you're feeding the entire planet and everybody on Earth has plenty of food, but the GMOs could possibly do this or that.
You can unpack that if
There's a lot to that, but
in a conversation like this, if we were able to talk for 20 minutes about some of this, most people would come to realize, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you're right. From a general speaking standpoint, the risk of you fertilizing your yard at the rate that you are, how does that compare to the benefit of what your farmer in the outskirts of the county is doing versus the benefit? There's not enough individualized stories.
right.
And so, again, it goes back to, I'm not saying we can fix it all. I'm just saying that the good thing about this conversation is sustainability, less inputs, less water. We've got to find more concrete ways to communicate, not very far from where we're sitting, people that are doing everything right, and yet there's critics out here. But if you took them away from here and you set them in century 2, what would they say about the risks of whatever else?
Yeah. So are those critics coming from a good place, you think, or is it all misguided?
No, I think they're coming from where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I don't
So
think...
you're open for discussion, basically, then. You're
Absolutely.
You're not saying that this is right or this is right, or it's okay to have GMOs and everything. And by the way, GMOs are in most things, right? The corn on the cob you eat is a GMO, right?
You don't need to be... There's 1,000 things I'd be more afraid of than GMOs. They've been glorified and made you be
This
fearful.
beer is GMOs, right?
I don't know the answer to that.
Probably, though.
I just know that if we pinned you down and made you decide what was healthier or not based on this preservative or that fuel or this vaccine or that prescription drug or this particular version of a crop or this lotion or this input that you're buying, not even thinking about it at Walmart. It's funny how ag has become a little bit of a target on its back.
It kind of has, yeah. But I don't think what people understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that GMO could be anything. I mean, I think when most people are reading about GMOs on Twitter or whatever it is, they're looking at and they're imagining a mad scientist that's dropping chemicals onto this wheat and it's making it balloon into this big warty-looking kernel. And in reality, isn't it just breeding things over time to make them yield better? Most of the time, anyways.
That's right. GMOs are a technology that is available and is safe. But again, I'm in an interesting spot of trying to communicate this, because it's like, compared to what?
Right. Compared to, what do they call those grains that are...
You don't think about 99% of what you're eating or drinking every day.
Some people do, but I don't. I'll drink whatever. I'll drink sorghum sake if we have to.
Well, I should have brought some of that.
You should have brought some. I mean, if I'm sitting here slamming Bud Lights every day, I'm obviously not too worried about it, but there are a lot of people that are concerned about it.
And that's okay. I think where we're at as Team Sorghum is, we're not going to throw ag under the bus.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely lots of great arguments for everything that we're doing in ag. It's not perfect, but this sustainability conversation about making things better, less water, less inputs. But how do I communicate with the wife in Johnson County? All of the above. Let her have choices. At least in this country, you have a lot of choices. You know, at the same time that this person's complaining, we're helping feed people that are starving in the world,
right,
with bags of grain,
right,
that they want to have calories. So there's nothing that's transgenic or unusual, Frankensteinian about anything that I'm doing in my organization.
right. You don't see firsthand some mad scientist trying to maneuver shit to, you know, I'm sure stuff out. I mean, I'm sure there's, if you can think of it, it exists. But for the most part, what people need to understand, I think, is that GMOs, broccoli is a good example, right? Broccoli is not even a natural plant. It's been bred that way over the centuries by our ancestors to create what it is today. It's from, I think it's a hybrid of some other plants, right? And that's a GMO.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any GMO today that's harmful.
Yeah.
I don't know of one.
And most things are GMOs. Almost every grain we eat is a GMO in some way, right? Because it's been bred that way over time.
We have through, what's the right word? We have bred better products across the aisle, and there's nothing that I'm familiar with that is dangerous from a GMO standpoint.
So is that something you have to argue for when you're talking to congressmen or politicians? They don't really care about that?
No, honestly, most of what we talk about is about farm subsidies and about the tiny slice of the budget that's connected to ag.
Okay, yeah. So basically, just like any other sector in DC or whatever, you're just arguing for a bigger budget or arguing for these farmers, just money-wise, right? That's what a lot of it is in DC.
Good question. Not totally. I think what we're arguing for is, how can we help the public understand the need and the value that they're receiving from agriculture in the United States?
Oh, okay.
So then it becomes a question of, compared to what? Most of the ag budget is less than 1% of the U.S. budget. Is
that a newer thing, or has that changed over the years?
It's basically the same. There's been some interesting factors in the last several years on particulars of the trade situation or whatever, food stamp need. Agriculture is a foundational part of the economy. What are you willing to invest in it? How much should you invest in it? And what are you getting for it? That's another good point of communication from our standpoint is, if you're not willing to do that, what are you going to pay for it at the retail shelf?
Right.
When
you're buying your product that farmers are producing, what are you willing to pay for that if you don't care in the first place?
Yeah, if you want to import it or pay other people for it, what does that safety conversation turn into?
Right.
The United States has, again, people's eyes blur over when you say that they have the most safe, abundant food supply at the price of anywhere in the world.
People don't want to hear that though, Jesse. They want to make they want.
It's a fact, and I hear what you're saying, but where else would you go in the world to find the choices that you have when you go to Dillon's?
Yeah.
Is it the farmer's job to decide what you're going to purchase?
I don't know.
Last time I checked, every time I've gone to Wichita, there's a amazing amount of choices.
Yes.
And I can pick and choose, and they're, comparatively speaking, pretty cheap.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It's interesting.
It really is. I mean, this is something we could dive into and probably rant about for an hour, you know? But for the sake of this conversation, I guess we'll just keep it at that.
Okay.
But I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for you to tell everybody, though, like why this is so important, because I think that people really, really take it for granted that they can walk into the grocery store and find anything they want, literally.
Yeah, and again,
except sake.
Well, that's a challenge. I'm not sure that they would pick it if it was available. Well, they might.
You never know.
But we're sitting here in this interesting choice of abundant supply, almost any choice that you can think of. I mean, if I wanted to drive 30 minutes in Wichita, I could find probably what I wanted. But again, farmers in this state and the U.S. are and want to increasingly make that sustainable, affordable, available, and anything you want. Do you want a certain color of potato or tomato or a certain this or that? The United States is the only country in the world that's going to deliver that.
Yeah, I want a rainbow potato. Can you make that?
Give us a couple months. And so sorghum, again, is an additional piece of the puzzle that can add options. But we also need to connect the story, and this is a good opportunity to connect why Milo or sorghum matters in this choice of ingredients that Americans have become, frankly,
too accustomed to.
Well, we all have everything that we want to buy. And actually, we're doing it extremely efficiently. And we'll continue to do it more efficiently.
I mean, yeah. You can buy a honey bun for like, what, 50, 75 cents?
Not a big honey buddy.
America.
Alrighty.
That being said, that is a really, really, really cool thing that you do, having that voice for the farmers. So how can somebody get into that? And what would you recommend to somebody that wants to get an ag but doesn't want to be a farmer? Maybe they want to do what you're doing. What would you recommend?
That's a great question. At this point, probably have some technical degree, perhaps a general ag degree, animal science or something like that.
Can you go into your field with another degree? What if you just have a bachelor's of business or a bachelor's of information technology? Do they have an opportunity, or is it more geared like they're looking for people that are in ag?
I would say that the Cargills of the world want to have a very technical engineering type degree. My jobs are a little bit rarer. I think you better know crop breeding, veterinarian branches, or communication. It's hard for me to sit here and think about the way that the educational system has changed between now and when I was an undergrad.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's say that you're hiring somebody to replace you, and your son wants to grow up to be in your spot. What would you recommend his path be? Is experience or college more important?
I would say have some connection to ag in terms of, have you been out on a farm? Do you even know the language?
Yeah.
Do you have any reference? Have you been willing to do any bucking of bales or something?
You don't want somebody to walk up and go, "Where's the cow house?
Where's the milk or the semen from?"
Wait, they come out of different holes?
Know some language, and then have a good degree, or at any level. I mean, some proficiency in something, whether it's technology or...
But preferably probably geared towards ag.
Yes.
If you can.
And then some relationships and internships or something like that. I think you're in good shape.
Do you see the future of sorghum and, I guess, ag as a whole growing? What's the future look like for you guys? I know biofuels are huge and everything that goes along with that.
I do. I think that if you look at India and China, those populations traditionally, as people make more money and as they have higher expectations of a standard of living, they want more protein. And all of these inputs feed into that, whether it's corn, sorghum, wheat, soybeans, ethanol. As long as we don't have a war,
hope we don't.
We shouldn't, but then position yourself for a growth economy that's not very sexy. And in ag, it's available. Position yourself right, get some experience, have some vocabulary, and avail yourself to some mentors that can help you plug you in.
So the future is bright then.
I do think that's right.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to eat less.
No, not in America at least.
As long as the world population grows and, you know.
So you guys like big eaters.
Well, most of the rest of the country has an experience of people like pork, people like beef. And I'm sorry, but it helps grow their brain. It helps grow their opportunities. We want to eat it. Their style of living, they start to expect it. There's nothing wrong with it. And the best input supplier for the world is the United States of America.
God bless it. All righty. Well, do you have any last words of advice or wisdom to the ag folk out there?
It's nice to have an opportunity to talk about ag with another Jesse.
It is. I mean, sorry if we kind of roundabouted there a few times, but I'm just trying to understand exactly what it is, because I am familiar with the ag industry because I've grown up in it, but as far as your position, it's sort of unique and something I've never really had insight into, you know? And I think a lot of people might appreciate that, at least getting to see that there's other opportunities, other positions out there in the ag industry that aren't just plowing a field or getting a calf at 4 a.m, like you said, you know?
This is, again, you'll have to convince me with data otherwise, but the way that the world is going, ag is a huge boom industry. And there's parts of that are related to aviation, engineering, math, science, public relations, advertising. You don't get excited about that for the most part. When you and I when I was in high school and even early college, people were kind of like, what are you going to do? I love farming, I love ranching, I love ag, and it's a growth industry. And just like any other sector, they have to have accountants, lawyers, salespeople,
right,
managers, advocates, and it's not going away.
It's a huge industry. It's not just the farmer dropping his grain off at the co-op and that's it. It's not that at all.
That's maybe the most important part from a pure who we love and who's making the business standpoint.
When you're getting down to the basics, yes.
But remember, you have logistical supply chains, you have export, you have people that need languages. You have to move the grain. You have to defend the state and the country on trade wars. You have to have politicians that are part of the interest of the whole industry. It's not different than any other sector of the economy.
Very true. Very cool. And you also have a podcast that talks about all this, right? What's that called?
I do. I have this amazing podcast, Sorghum State Podcast. You can find us anywhere. Sorghum State Podcast.
Sorghum State Podcast.
Yes, sir.
And how do you spell sorghum, just for everybody out there?
SORGHUM.
Sorghum State Podcast. You can find it on every platform.
I think that's right.
Awesome. Well, thanks for what you do. Thanks for feeding America and helping feed America. And I'm glad we could come on today and drink some beer together.
Hey, man, this has been enjoyable. It's been a fun conversation. I hope people have gotten something out of it.
Yeah, I hope so too. I think they might. So I appreciate it, and cheers, brother.
Thanks,
Even though
Jesse.
I'm done with all my beer, but I'll still cheers you.
Take care.
You too.